Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into some more fascinating behavioral science.
Always.
All right, well, today we're going to be exploring the small big.
Oh, a classic. I love this one.
It really is full of interesting ideas and written by some of the best in the field. Steve J. Martin, Noah J. Goldstein, and Robert B. Cialdini.
Cialdini, of course, is a legend when it comes to persuasion science.
Absolutely. And the premise of this deep dive is to uncover just how much power small changes can have on influencing behavior.
And the book is full of amazing examples of just that, those subtle interventions that they call small bigs that lead to, well, disproportionately big results.
Perfect example, and this one is straight from the book. Think about the UK tax office. They're always looking for ways to get people to pay on time.
Right.
Well, they found that by adding one single sentence to their standard reminder letter, it had a big impact.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What was the magic sentence?
It was, the vast majority of UK citizens pay their taxes on time.
Ah, so classic social proof, using the power of the crowd to nudge people in the right direction.
Exactly. And it's fascinating how effective that can be.
Hmm.
Instead of threats or penalties, just simply pointing out what everyone else is doing.
Well, it makes sense when you consider how wired we are as social creatures. I mean, we crave that sense of belonging, that approval, wanting to fit in. It all plays into our self-image as well.
It's almost like an invisible force pulling us towards conforming with the group.
It really is. And I think we often underestimate just how pervasive social proof truly is. We see it with tax compliance, but it pops up everywhere, even things like, oh, I don't know, energy conservation.
Oh, so.
Well, studies have actually found that telling people about their neighbors' energy-saving habits, that can be more effective than, say, focusing on the cost savings.
It all comes back to fitting in. So then, how do we leverage social proof if we're trying to promote an action that might not be that common yet? Say we're advocating for something with limited support.
Okay, so in those cases, we need to shift gears a bit. We can't highlight the behavior itself as much, but what we can do is focus on what we call injunctive norms.
Meaning, what society in general thinks is the right thing to do.
Exactly. Let's say you're promoting, oh, I don't know, animal welfare. Even if donations are currently low, you could highlight survey results that show strong public support for animal protection.
That's really clever. It's like saying, look, even though not everyone is donating yet, most people agree with our principles.
Right. You're tapping into that shared value system. Another approach is to find what we call uncommon commonalities.
Uncommon commonalities.
These are things people in a particular group share that are rare outside the group. Think about people who, say, restore vintage motorcycles.
Okay, I can see that. They've got that shared passion that sets them apart, but also makes them feel connected.
Exactly. It gives them both a sense of belonging and distinctiveness, which can be a potent combination for motivating them.
Really interesting. Now, let's shift gears from social proof to another fascinating concept from the small big framing.
Oh yes, framing. This can make or break your message. It's all about really understanding how your audience perceives what's normal. Then, you can tailor your message to match.
Like if you're trying to promote healthy habits in an office that's full of junk food, you might use a negative frame to highlight the drawbacks of indulging in those snacks.
Exactly, because it plays on that fear of being the odd one out, the unhealthy outlier.
Makes you think twice about reaching for that donut when everyone else is grabbing a salad.
But on the flip side, if that healthy habit is uncommon, you'd want to switch to a positive frame. You highlight the benefits and celebrate the few already engaging in the behavior.
Making it seem more desirable and aspirational.
Exactly. So the key with framing is to really adapt to how common that behavior is, not just use the same approach every time.
That makes a lot of sense. Now let's move on to something a bit different. This one's rooted in criminology, but has some pretty fascinating implications for influencing behavior, the broken windows theory.
Ah, an interesting one. This theory argues that those little signs of disorder we see, they can actually encourage more serious transgressions.
So the idea is that a broken window, left unrepaired, could lead to more vandalism and eventually more serious crimes.
Precisely. It's all about the power of those environmental cues, those little details that we might not consciously register, but they can still influence our actions.
There was that one experiment where researchers put advertisements on bikes parked in an alleyway, right?
That's the one. And in one scenario, the alley was completely trashed, graffiti, litter, the works. In the other, it was perfectly clean.
And what happened?
Well, predictably, far more of the bikes with ads in the messy alley were vandalized.
That's kind of unsettling, as if seeing that disorder gave people implicit permission to be destructive themselves.
It really makes you think about how our surroundings impact us. Imagine a messy office, right? Might subtly encourage employees to be less diligent in their work.
While a well-maintained office could foster a sense of responsibility, so it's not just about aesthetics, it's about creating an environment that encourages positive behavior.
Precisely.
Now, let's dive into personalization and its role in persuasion. I think we all know that feeling when we hear our name in a crowded room, even amidst all the noise.
The cocktail party phenomenon.
Right. It shows how we're wired to pay attention to things that are relevant to us.
Exactly. So imagine a fundraising letter addressed to Dear Your Name instead of just a generic greeting.
That personal touch makes it feel so much more, well, personal.
It makes the recipient feel seen and valued. And that can make all the difference when you're trying to get them to take action.
Okay, now here's another concept from the small big that really surprised me. The power of potential.
Now, this one is truly counterintuitive, but research suggests that highlighting potential, the promise of what could be, that can be more persuasive than showcasing past achievements.
So you're saying that sometimes emphasizing someone's potential to be great can be more effective than pointing to what they've actually accomplished.
Exactly. It's fascinating, right? The book gives the example of evaluating job applicants. Those who scored high on leadership potential were actually rated more favorably than those with actual leadership experience but lower potential scores.
It's almost like betting on the future rather than focusing on the past.
That's a great way to put it. It plays on our optimism and that desire for progress, the excitement of what lies ahead.
So fascinating. Okay, let's talk about commitments. We all make them, but actually following through, that can be a challenge.
Absolutely. But the book really emphasizes the power of what they call implementation intentions.
What does that mean?
It's about getting specific. So instead of just saying, I'll finish that report, you prompt the person to think about the how and when. Okay, when are you going to do it? Where will you sit? What steps need to be taken?
So you're turning that vague intention into a concrete plan.
Exactly. And that makes it far more likely they'll actually do it. There's even research showing this with voter turnout.
Oh, right, the voting plan script. They ask people to think about their plan for voting the polling place, the time they'll go.
And those who do that, they're significantly more likely to actually vote.
That's amazing. Anything else on commitments?
Oh, another interesting thing is framing commitments in relation to our future selves.
You mean instead of I should work out tomorrow, it's my future self will thank me for working out tomorrow.
Yes, because then you're tapping into that desire for a better future.
That's pretty clever. It makes it feel more, I don't know, important.
Exactly.
Now, let's shift gears and talk about defaults. They're everywhere, from the settings on our phones to organ donation programs.
And they work because of inertia, that natural human tendency to stick with the path of least resistance.
It's like that study where people are more likely to choose a snack just because it's closer to them.
Precisely. But defaults aren't always the best solution. They're not ideal when you need multiple options or personalized choices.
So what do you do then?
Enhanced active choice is an interesting approach for those cases. It's not just about presenting choices, but also highlighting what you stand to lose if you don't choose something specific.
It's like those limited time offers that make you feel like you'll miss out if you don't act fast.
Right. Makes people really think about what they're giving up.
Smart strategy. Now, I think we all know the pain of unproductive meetings.
Oh, yes. The dreaded meeting black hole.
But the small big has some great tips for getting the most out of meetings and avoiding that dreaded groupthink where no one wants to rock the boat.
Right. One way to break free from that is by having people submit information before the meeting.
So they come in already having thought things through independently.
Exactly. Another thing is to have the leader speak last. That prevents their opinion from swaying the discussion prematurely.
Creates a more level playing field and encourages different viewpoints. What else can we do?
Checklists. Having a pre-meeting checklist is super helpful for making sure you're covering everything and keeps the meeting focused. And lastly, don't underestimate the power of seating arrangements.
Really? How so?
A circular table can promote collaboration, while a more linear setup might encourage individual expression, depending on what you're aiming for.
Very interesting. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's talk about something that might seem superficial, but it actually holds a lot of sway. Clothing.
Ah, the power of attire.
Dress for success isn't just a saying. There's research that shows how clothing signals expertise and authority and can actually influence whether people comply with your requests.
Remember that experiment where people were more likely to follow someone jaywalking if they were wearing a suit?
It's amazing. It's like the suit gave them an air of legitimacy.
But of course, there are times when building rapport is more important than projecting authority.
Right. You don't want to come off as too intimidating or unapproachable.
Exactly. So the key is finding that balance between authority and similarity.
How do you do that?
The book suggests dressing just one level above your audience's usual attire. It conveys expertise without creating too much distance.
That's clever. Okay, now let's wrap things up for this part with the topic of gratitude.
A simple act, but with profound effects, especially in the workplace.
There was that study about fundraisers, right? The ones who received expressions of gratitude, they actually made significantly more calls afterwards.
Exactly. It's about more than just making someone feel good. Gratitude can actually fuel motivation.
What I find even more fascinating is that gratitude seems to have this ripple effect.
Oh, absolutely. People who receive expressions of gratitude are more likely to then help others.
So it creates this chain reaction of kindness.
Exactly. Spreads the good vibes all around.
Well, I think that's a great place to pause for now.
Lots to think about.
It really is.
Well,
We'll pick back up with more from the small big in the next part of our deep dive.
can't wait. Okay, so I want to dive into something that might seem counterintuitive at first. It's the idea that giving can actually lead to greater gains.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Well, the small big has this great anecdote about Reverend Steele. He was this resourceful rector who had to raise a lot of money to restore his church.
Did he do the usual bake sales and fundraising dinners?
He tried something much bolder. He actually gave away the church's money.
Like, he gave away money instead of asking for it.
Exactly. During the offering, he passed around a plate full of 10-pound notes and told everyone to take one.
Wow. Talk about a leap of faith.
It was a brilliant way to tap into the principle of reciprocity. By giving people something tangible, he triggered this feeling of obligation.
So they felt compelled to give back even more.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the best way to get something is to give it away first.
Love that. Now, let's talk about something that can be a bit of a slippery slope when it comes to persuasion manipulation.
Right. It's important to distinguish between ethical persuasion and manipulation.
Because one is about genuine influence, the other is more about trickery.
Exactly. Ethical persuasion respects the individual's freedom to choose. Manipulation, on the other hand, it uses deception and often harms the other person in the process.
It's about respecting people's autonomy, not taking advantage of them.
Precisely. The small big is very clear about this. Authenticity and transparency are absolutely essential. If you're hiding your true intentions or being deceptive, well, that's crossing the line into manipulation.
Ethical persuasion is more about open communication and using these techniques responsibly.
Right. And remember, manipulation can backfire. When people realize they've been tricked, they resent it, and they're less likely to trust you in the future.
Trust is everything, really.
Absolutely. Okay, let's shift gears again. Let's talk about memory.
Okay.
We tend to think of our memories as accurate recordings of the past, but they're actually surprisingly malleable.
Oh, I've definitely had those moments where I remember something vividly, and then it turns out it didn't happen quite that way.
The small big talks about this fascinating thing called the peak end rule. It basically says that we judge experiences mostly on the most intense parts and the ending, rather than the overall experience.
So a few amazing moments, or a really great ending, can totally color our perception of the whole thing.
Exactly. Kind of like that saying, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Except here, it's the peak moments and the final impression that really stick with us.
So if you want people to remember something fondly, you need to make those peak moments and the ending really count.
Exactly. Whether it's a vacation or even just a customer interaction, focusing on those key moments makes a big difference.
It's about curating the entire experience, understanding that how people remember it is what really matters.
Precisely. Okay, let's talk about a technique that can be really powerful when used ethically. Anchoring.
Anchoring sounds nautical.
It's this psychological principle where our judgments are influenced by the first piece of information we get, even if it's totally irrelevant to the decision at hand.
So you're saying that, say, the first number I hear can set a benchmark in my mind that affects how I evaluate other options.
Exactly. It's like dropping an anchor that pulls your thinking in a certain direction.
That could definitely be used for manipulative purposes.
It could, but it can also be used ethically. Like, say, in a negotiation. If you start by throwing out a really high number,
The other person might be more likely to make concessions.
Exactly. It sets their expectations. Even seemingly small anchors can have an impact. Think about those prices ending in 99 cents.
Oh, that's so common.
It works.
Hmm.
Even though the difference is tiny, seeing that 99 cents makes it feel like a much better deal than a round number.
Our brains are so easily influenced by these subtle things.
They are, and understanding them can help us become more savvy consumers and, well, more persuasive communicators.
Absolutely. Okay, now for something we often see as a negative, mistakes.
Right. But the small big actually suggests that mistakes are incredibly valuable learning opportunities.
So instead of trying to hide our errors, we should embrace them.
Precisely. It's about shifting from error avoidance to error management, creating a culture where mistakes are seen as inevitable and, importantly, as chances to learn.
That's a much healthier mindset, I think.
It is, and it's not just about learning from our own mistakes. We can learn from the mistakes of others.
Oh, absolutely. So much knowledge can be gained by studying past failures.
Exactly. The book talks about keeping mistake logs, detailed records of what went wrong and what you learned from it.
It's like a cheat sheet for what not to do.
Exactly. Reviewing those logs can help prevent you from making the same mistakes again.
It's a great reminder that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of the process.
Well said. Okay, I want to touch on pacing and sequencing and persuasion.
The order in which you present information.
Right. We often assume that the order doesn't matter that much, but it can have a big impact on how our message is perceived.
So there's an art to structuring a persuasive presentation or negotiation.
Absolutely. The best sequence depends on how complex the decision is and what motivates the audience.
Got any examples?
Sure. Research shows that when you're presenting something complex, it's often better to lead with the thing you're offering and then follow up with the price.
So highlight the value proposition first,
Yeah.
then reveal the cost.
Exactly. It allows the audience to get excited about the benefits before considering the price tag, which makes the offer more appealing.
That's clever. So it's all about thinking strategically about how you order information, whether it's accomplishments in a job interview or the benefits of a product before its price.
Absolutely. Even small tweaks in sequencing can have a significant impact.
Very insightful. Now, let's talk about something that's incredibly powerful, but can also be tricky to handle. Emotions.
Emotions drive so much of our decision-making. Knowing how to appeal to them ethically is essential.
A well-told story or a heartfelt plea can be incredibly persuasive.
It's true, but we have to be careful not to exploit people's emotions for personal gain. That crosses a line.
Right. It has to be authentic.
Exactly. The small big talks about understanding which emotions are most relevant to the situation.
So it's not just about evoking any emotion. It's about choosing the right ones.
Right. For instance, if you're trying to get people to donate to a charity, appealing to their compassion will probably be more effective than trying to scare them into it.
It makes sense.
And remember, emotional appeals are most effective when combined with logic and evidence.
So it's about finding the right balance between head and heart.
Exactly. Okay, let's talk about power.
Power. That's a loaded word.
It is. The small big looks at how our perceptions of power, both our own and others, affect how persuasive we are.
I can see how feeling powerful could make someone more confident and therefore more convincing.
Absolutely. But the book also stresses the importance of using power responsibly. Power can corrupt, and using it to manipulate others is wrong.
It's about using power to empower others, not to control them.
Exactly. The book has some interesting ideas about how we can boost our own sense of power, which can then make us more persuasive.
Like what?
Well, simple things like adopting a powerful posture.
So standing up straight and making eye contact can actually make us feel more powerful.
Research suggests it does.
Yeah.
And that increased sense of power can then translate into greater self-assurance and persuasiveness.
Fascinating how mind and body are so connected.
They are. Speaking of physicality, let's talk about touch.
Touch, like physically touching someone.
It might seem strange, but studies show that even subtle touch can increase liking and trust.
So a light touch on the arm or a firm handshake could actually make someone more likely to agree with me.
There's evidence for it, like waitresses who touch their customers' arms get bigger tips.
Wow, that's powerful. But you have to be careful with touch. It can easily be misconstrued.
Absolutely. You need to be respectful of personal boundaries and cultural norms. What's considered friendly in one culture might be completely inappropriate in another.
Right.
So always err on the side of caution, especially in professional settings.
Good advice. Now, let's circle back to a fundamental principle in persuasion. Understanding your audience.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own message and forget to consider the other person's perspective.
Right. Everyone has their own thoughts and feelings and motivations.
The small big emphasizes empathy and perspective taking as essential tools.
So trying to see things from their point of view.
Exactly. And it's not just about understanding their perspective, it's also about respecting their intelligence and their autonomy.
People can tell when you're being condescending or insincere.
Right. If they feel patronized or manipulated, they're less likely to be persuaded.
It's about treating people as equals, acknowledging that they can think for themselves.
Precisely. The book gives some great tips for showing empathy and building rapport.
Like what?
Active listening is one of the most effective.
So really paying attention to what they're saying, not just waiting for your turn to talk.
Exactly. Asking questions to clarify what they mean, reflecting back what you've heard to show that you're listening.
It's about making them feel heard and understood.
Exactly. And that can go a long way in building trust and making them more receptive to your message.
Okay, let's talk about humor. I don't usually think of humor as a tool for persuasion.
Right. We associate it with fun and entertainment, but research suggests it can be incredibly persuasive.
How so?
Humor can create a sense of connection and make people more open to what you have to say.
So if you can make someone laugh, they're more likely to listen to you.
It can definitely help, but the small big emphasizes the importance of using humor wisely.
Right, a bad joke can ruin everything.
It can. You have to be careful to choose humor that's appropriate for the context and respectful of your audience.
Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about first impressions. They're so important.
The small big goes into the psychology behind them and gives some great tips for making a good one.
I'm all ears.
One of the most effective ways to make a positive first impression is to project warmth and competence.
So being friendly and knowledgeable.
Exactly. People are more likely to trust and like someone who seems both likable and capable.
That makes sense. It's about finding that balance.
Right. Simple things like smiling, making eye contact, and having confident body language can make a big difference.
So it's about paying attention to both what you say and how you say it.
Absolutely. And remember, first impressions form quickly, so you have to be on your game from the start.
Okay, let's move on to storytelling.
We often think of stories as just entertainment, but they can be incredibly persuasive.
Really? In what way?
Stories engage both our emotions and our intellect, making us more receptive to the message.
So it's about creating an experience for the listener.
Precisely. The book emphasizes the importance of crafting stories that are relevant to the audience and memorable.
So not just any random story will do, it has to resonate with the listener.
Right. It needs to be a story they can connect with and that reinforces the message you're trying to convey.
Now let's talk about something no one enjoys dealing with.
Objections.
Objections can be frustrating, but they're a normal part of persuasion.
So instead of seeing them as roadblocks, we should see them as opportunities. Exactly. An objection often means the person is actually engaging with your message and thinking it through.
Right. If they don't even bother to object, they're probably not that interested.
Precisely. The small big suggests some good strategies for handling objections constructively.
Like what?
First, really listen to the objection, acknowledge their concerns, and then offer a clear and concise counterargument.
So address it head on, don't try to dismiss it.
Right. The goal isn't to win the argument, it's about finding a solution that works for everyone.
It's about collaboration, not confrontation.
Exactly. Speaking of which, let's talk about compromise.
I always thought the goal of a negotiation was to get everything you want.
A lot of people think that. But effective negotiation often means finding a middle ground.
So it's more of a give and take.
Exactly. The small big talks about the importance of understanding both your priorities and the other person's priorities.
So knowing what you're willing to compromise on and what you absolutely need.
Right. And then being creative in finding solutions that meet both sides' needs.
That makes sense. Now, what about dealing with difficult people?
We all have to deal with them sometimes.
It can be so draining.
It can. But the small big has some helpful advice for managing those interactions.
Like what?
Things like staying calm, setting clear boundaries, and focusing on the issue at hand.
So not letting their behavior get to you.
Right. It's also about depersonalizing the situation, separating the person from the problem.
Right. So you're addressing the issue, not attacking the person.
Exactly. And sometimes the best thing you can do with a difficult person is just disengage.
Walk away.
If the situation is unproductive, yes, you don't have to engage in every battle.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's switch gears and talk about relationships.
Relationships are so important, both personally and professionally.
They really are the foundation of everything.
Exactly. And The Small Big has some great insights on how to build and nurture strong relationships.
Okay, tell me more.
One of the most effective ways to build relationships is to show genuine interest in other people.
So asking questions and really wanting to get to know them.
Exactly. People are drawn to those who are genuinely interested in them. We all want to feel valued and appreciated.
I agree.
Simple things like asking open-ended questions, listening attentively, and remembering details about their lives can make a big difference.
It's about being present in the conversation, not just going through the motions.
Absolutely. And it's also about finding common ground, those shared interests and experiences that create a connection.
Those shared connections can be so powerful.
They can. And let's not forget about the power of gratitude. We talked about it in the workplace, but expressing gratitude is essential in all relationships.
It's about acknowledging the good things in our lives and letting people know we appreciate them.
Exactly. Research shows that expressing gratitude is good for both the giver and the receiver.
So it's a win-win.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
It can improve our mood, strengthen our relationships, and even benefit our physical health.
That's amazing.
It is. The Small Big gives some practical tips for cultivating gratitude.
Like keeping a gratitude journal.
That's one approach. Another is to simply make a point of telling people how much you appreciate them, whether it's a handwritten note or just saying thank you.
So making gratitude a part of our daily lives.
Exactly. The more we practice gratitude, the more we notice the good things in our lives.
I love that. Now let's talk about trust. It's so foundational to everything.
The Small Big really emphasizes that.
So how do we build trust with others?
One of the most effective ways is to be consistent in our words and actions.
So doing what we say we're going to do.
Exactly. People trust those who are reliable and predictable. If you're constantly changing your mind or breaking your promises, it's hard for people to trust you.
Makes sense.
The book recommends things like making public commitments, setting realistic goals, and holding yourself accountable.
So being intentional about your behavior and following through.
Exactly. Transparency is important too.
Being open and honest in your interactions.
Right. The more you demonstrate trustworthiness, the more others will trust you in return.
Okay, now for the tough one, rejection.
Rejection is never fun.
It can be really hard to deal with.
It can. But The Small Big has some good advice for coping with rejection in a healthy way.
Like what?
Things like reframing the situation, focusing on your strengths, and seeking support from your network.
So changing your perspective,
Yeah.
reminding yourself of what you're good at, and leaning on your friends and family.
Exactly. It's also important to learn from the experience and use it to grow.
So rejection could be a valuable learning opportunity if we approach it the right way.
Absolutely. Sometimes rejection just means you're aiming too low.
You're saying if you're not getting rejected sometimes, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough.
That's a good way to look at it. Rejection can be a sign that you're reaching for something truly meaningful.
That's encouraging. Okay, last topic for this part, continuous learning.
In today's world, it's more important than ever to be a lifelong learner.
I completely agree. There's always something new to discover.
Exactly. The Small Big talks about the importance of actively seeking out new information, trying new things, and being open to feedback.
It's about having a growth mindset and stepping outside your comfort zone.
Precisely. It's also about learning from your mistakes and using those lessons to improve.
Mistakes are valuable data points.
They are. The more we learn, the better we become at everything, including persuasion.
I love that. Now let's talk about nonverbal communication. It's often more powerful than we realize.
We tend to focus on the words we say, but our body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, all of that communicates volumes.
Right. Sometimes you can tell what someone's really thinking by their body language, even if they're saying something different.
The Small Big dives into the psychology of nonverbal communication and gives some really interesting strategies for using it effectively.
Okay, I'm all ears.
One of the most important things is to be aware of your posture.
So standing up straight, making eye contact, all that good stuff.
Exactly. Confident body language conveys authority and trustworthiness.
Makes sense. Slouching or avoiding eye contact makes you look unsure of yourself.
Right. The book even suggests visualizing a string pulling you up from the top of your head to help improve your posture.
I'll have to try that. Any other tips for nonverbal communication?
Subtly mirroring the other person's body language can create rapport.
So if they lean forward, I should lean forward too.
It can work, but don't be too obvious about it. It should be subtle and natural.
It's about creating that unconscious sense of connection.
Exactly. The book also talks about being aware of your facial expressions.
So it's not just about our body language, it's about what our face is saying, too.
Right. Your facial expressions convey a lot of emotion, so you need to be conscious of the signals you're sending.
A smile can communicate warmth, while a frown might signal disapproval.
Exactly. The book suggests practicing facial expressions in front of a mirror to become more aware of how you come across.
Good idea. Okay, let's revisit a crucial concept, knowing your audience.
It's easy to get so focused on our own message that we forget about the person we're talking to.
We've got to remember that they have their own thoughts and feelings and motivations.
The small big stresses the importance of empathy and perspective taking.
Putting yourself in their shoes.
Exactly. And it's not just about understanding where they're coming from, it's also about respecting their intelligence and their right to make their own decisions.
No one likes to feel like they're being talked down to.
Right. Condescension and manipulation are the fastest ways to shut down a conversation.
It's about treating people with respect, acknowledging that they're capable of thinking for themselves.
Absolutely. The book gives some really good tips for demonstrating empathy and building rapport.
Like what?
Active listening is key.
So really engaging with what they're saying, not just waiting for your turn to talk.
Right. Asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what you've heard to make sure you understand them.
It's about showing that you're genuinely interested in what they have to say.
Exactly. And that builds trust and makes them more likely to listen to you.
Okay, let's talk about humor.
Mhm.
I don't usually think of humor as a tool for persuasion.
I know. We usually think of it as just for fun. But research suggests it can be a really effective way to persuade people.
Interesting. How does that work?
Humor can help you connect with people on an emotional level and make them more receptive to your message.
So if you can make them laugh, they're more likely to agree with you.
It can definitely help. But the small big stresses the importance of using humor appropriately.
Right. A bad joke can really backfire.
Exactly. You have to be careful to choose humor that's suitable for the situation and that won't offend anyone.
Makes sense. Now let's talk about trust. It's so important in any relationship.
The small big dedicates a whole section to building trust.
Okay, I'd love to hear more about that.
One of the most effective ways to build trust is to be consistent in your words and actions.
So doing what you say you're going to do.
Exactly. People trust those who are reliable and predictable. If you're constantly changing your mind or breaking promises, it's hard for people to trust you.
That makes sense.
The book suggests things like making your commitments public, setting realistic goals, and holding yourself accountable.
So being intentional about your behavior and following through on your promises.
Exactly. Transparency is also important.
Being open and honest in your interactions.
Right. The more you demonstrate that you're trustworthy, the more others will trust you in return.
Okay, now for the part that no one likes. Rejection.
Rejection is never easy.
It can be really discouraging.
You can. But the small big has some really good advice for coping with rejection in a healthy way.
I'm listening.
The book talks about reframing the situation, focusing on your strengths, and seeking support from your network.
So trying to see it from a different perspective, reminding yourself of what you're good at, and reaching out to your friends and family for support.
Exactly. It's also important to try to learn from the experience and use it as an opportunity to grow.
So rejection can actually be a good thing if you approach it the right way.
It can. Sometimes rejection is a sign that you're aiming too low.
So if you're not getting rejected sometimes, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough.
Exactly. Rejection can be a sign that you're reaching for something truly meaningful.
That's a really empowering way to think about it. Okay, last topic for this section. Continuous learning.
In today's world, it's essential to be a lifelong learner.
I agree. There's always something new to learn and new skills to develop.
The small big emphasizes the importance of constantly seeking out new information, trying new things, and being open to feedback.
It's about having a growth mindset and being willing to step outside your comfort zone.
Absolutely. And it's about learning from your mistakes and using those lessons to get better.
Right. Mistakes are valuable data points.
They are, and the more we learn, the more successful we'll be in all areas of life, including persuasion.
That's a great message. Okay, let's talk about something that's more powerful than we often realize. Nonverbal communication.
We often focus on what we say, but our body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, all of that communicates a lot too.
I've definitely noticed that. You can often tell how someone's really feeling by their body language, even if they're saying something different.
Exactly. The small big goes deep into the psychology of nonverbal communication and offers some great strategies for using it effectively.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
One of the most important things is to be aware of your posture.
So standing up straight, making eye contact, that kind of thing.
Precisely. Confident body language conveys authority and trustworthiness.
Makes sense? Yeah. Slouching or avoiding eye contact can make you look uncertain or untrustworthy.
Right. The book even recommends visualizing a string pulling you upward from the top of your head to improve your posture.
I like that. What other tips do you have for nonverbal communication?
Subtly mirroring the other person's body language can help build rapport.
So if they lean in, I should lean in too.
It can be effective, but don't be too obvious about it. The mirroring should be subtle and natural.
It's about creating that unspoken connection.
Exactly. The book also talks about being mindful of your facial expressions.
So it's not just about body language, it's about the expressions on our face too.
Right. Your facial expressions convey a lot of emotion, so you need to be aware of what your face is saying.
Like a smile can communicate warmth and friendliness, while a frown might signal disapproval.
Precisely. The book recommends practicing different facial expressions in front of a mirror to become more aware of how you come across.
That's a good idea. Okay, let's go back to a key principle we touched on earlier. Understanding your audience.
It's easy to get so wrapped up in our own message that we forget to think about the person we're trying to persuade.
We have to remember that they have their own unique thoughts and feelings and motivations.
The small big emphasizes the importance of empathy and perspective taking.
Putting ourselves in their shoes, trying to see things from their point of view.
Exactly. And it's not just about understanding where they're coming from. It's also about respecting their intelligence and their right to make their own decisions.
No one likes to feel like they're being talked down to or manipulated.
Exactly. If you want to persuade someone, you need to treat them with respect.
Acknowledge that they have their own thoughts and feelings, and that they're capable of making their own decisions.
Precisely. The book offers some really practical tips for showing empathy and building rapport.
I'd love to hear some of them.
Active listening is one of the most effective.
So, being fully present in the conversation, really paying attention to what they're saying.
Exactly. Asking clarifying questions, reflecting back what you've heard to make sure you understand their perspective.
It's about showing that you're genuinely interested in what they have to say.
Right. And that goes a long way in building trust.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about something that I don't usually think of as a persuasive tool. Humor.
We often associate humor with entertainment, but it can be a powerful tool for persuasion.
Really? How so?
Humor can help you connect with people on an emotional level, making them more open to what you have to say.
So if you can make someone laugh, you're more likely to win them over.
It can definitely help. But as the small big emphasizes, it's important to use humor wisely.
Right. A bad joke can ruin everything.
Exactly. You need to choose humor that's appropriate for the situation and that won't offend anyone.
Okay, let's move on to something that's fundamental to any strong relationship.
Hmm.
Trust.
The small big has some great advice on how to build trust with others.
I'd love to hear it.
One of the most important things is to be consistent in your words and actions.
So walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. People trust those who are reliable and predictable. If you're constantly changing your mind or breaking promises, it's hard for people to trust you.
That makes sense.
The book suggests things like making your commitments public, setting realistic goals, and holding yourself accountable.
So being intentional about your behavior and following through on what you say you'll do.
Exactly. Transparency is also important.
Being open and honest in your interactions.
Right. The more you demonstrate that you're trustworthy, the more others will trust you in return.
Now, for the part that no one enjoys. Rejection.
It's never fun, but it's a part of life.
It can be really discouraging, though.
It can be. It can. But the small big has some really helpful advice for dealing with rejection and coming out stronger on the other side.
Okay, I'd love to hear it.
The book talks about things like reframing the situation, focusing on your strengths, and seeking support from people around you.
So basically shifting your perspective, reminding yourself of what you're good at, and reaching out to your network for support.
Precisely. It's also important to try to learn from the experience and use it to grow.
So rejection can be a valuable learning opportunity if we approach it with the right mindset.
Absolutely. Sometimes rejection is simply a sign that you're aiming too low.
You mean if you're not getting rejected every now and then, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough.
Exactly. Rejection can be a sign that you're reaching for something truly meaningful.
I like that. Now let's talk about continuous learning.
In today's world, it's more important than ever to be a lifelong learner.
I completely agree. There's always something new to learn and new skills to develop.
The small big emphasizes the importance of constantly seeking out new information, trying new things, and being open to feedback.
It's about having that growth mindset, stepping outside of your comfort zone.
Absolutely. And it's also about learning from your mistakes, using those lessons to improve.
Mistakes are valuable data points if we look at them the right way.
They are. And the more we learn, the more successful we'll be in all areas of life, including persuasion.
It really does feel like we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the small big. Such a fascinating exploration of all those subtle influences that shape behavior.
It is. We've explored everything from the power of social proof to expressing gratitude.
And we've learned about framing our messages effectively, maximizing meetings, even how our clothing choices can make a difference.
And let's not forget about the importance of understanding our audience, cultivating trust, and appealing to emotions in the right way.
Oh, and those strategies for handling objections, reframing rejection, and the importance of continuous learning.
So many valuable small bigs that can really make a big difference in our lives.
Before we wrap up, why don't we put together a quick 10-point summary of the most actionable takeaways from the small big?
Okay, I like that. A handy roadmap for our listeners.
Perfect. So number one, harness the power of social proof. Show people what others are doing, especially those they admire or identify with.
Number 2, tailor your message framing. Use a positive or negative frame based on how common or uncommon the behavior is.
Number 3, pay attention to environmental cues. Even small signs of disorder can influence behavior.
Number 4, personalize your communication. Use people's names, tell stories, make it relevant to them.
Number 5, focus on potential. Highlight the promise of what could be, not just past achievements.
Number 6, encourage concrete action plans. Help people turn their intentions into specific, actionable steps.
Number 7, use enhanced active choice. Highlight what people stand to lose by not choosing a particular option.
Number 8, maximize your meetings. Encourage independent thinking. Have the leaders speak last. Use checklists.
Number 9, dress for success. Elevate your attire to project expertise and authority.
And number 10, cultivate gratitude. Make it a habit to express appreciation to others.
And there you have it, 10 powerful strategies for becoming a more influential communicator.
Remember, these small bigs aren't about manipulation. They're about ethically using what we know about human behavior to create positive change.
It's about making those small changes that can have a big impact.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to think about which small big you're going to try first.
Until next time.